Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. How are you?
I'm great. Very excited to see all of you here.
I am trying to
Excited
get
to
my
be here.
background to update. So just 1 second.
Sure.
How's
Did you all
everybody
get a
doing?
chance? Go ahead, Lauren.
Oh, I was just asking how everyone's doing.
Good. Well, as good as can be in this.
Yes.
A little
Yes.
bit nerve-wracking, but whatever.
You guys are
I have
going
a
to do
dumb
so great.
question. How do I promote the background?
Next to on the bottom panel where it's got stop video, if you select the caret, you should have an option for choose virtual background.
I do.
If you click into there, there's a little plus sign where you can upload an image.
Got it. Okay, hold on. It says my computer will not support that.
If that's the case, we will proceed with your lovely background. Like it's on the list of things today to be worried about. That one is not on my list.
Okay, sounds good.
If that works for you. All right, and then just before we get started, because we're going to kick it off right as Mary lets us know at 9:15, Mary Case, that is, with the RVA Tech Group. The other Mary, could you just remind me where to put the emphasis in your last name so I pronounce it correctly?
Sure, it's Glarum.
Glarum, perfect.
Uh-huh.
I'm going to write that down like it's sounds, not it is how it's spelled. But
No worries.
I'd rather get it right than not ask. And not. Great. All right, thank you very much. Now mommy's meeting is starting. I don't know if you all can't see her. That's actually a really good thing.
Jess, you can get started whenever you're ready.
All right, can you please go downstairs? I'll see you in a few minutes, okay? Okay, I'll get you a snack after this. All right, Mary, are we good to go?
You are good to go.
Perfect. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first ever virtual RVA Tech Women's Conference, the Drive Conference. I am so excited to be welcoming you all. My name is Jessica Allison, and I am one of the co-founders of Product Tank Richmond. And I have the honor of presenting these three wonderful women who are going to be your What is Product Management panelists today. So we'll quickly just do an overview and we'll jump right in. Our first panelist is Megan Overton. She's a product management consultant at the Mom Project and former head of product at CoderPad, and prior to that with Snag. Good morning, Megan.
Good morning.
We also have with us Lauren Hill, who is a product lead at Capital One. Good morning, Lauren.
Good morning.
And Mary Glarum, Director of Product Management at a company called In Rhythm and former Director of Digital Product Management at CoStar. Good morning, Mary.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. So I know I was short on bios. I'm going to put all of their LinkedIn information in the chat so you can connect. And one final bit of housekeeping before we dive right in. I just wanted to share a few thoughts and set the stage as we go into a conversation about what is product management. Mostly because there's no right or wrong answers. We are going to give ourselves room this morning to talk about various approaches we've seen, what works, what doesn't work, and there's absolutely no judgment. Our goal here today is to just share these wonderful panelist experiences and give you all just a tidbit, 30 minutes worth of insight into this awesome career path. If you have any questions, please, please, please post them in the chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that. And we'll pull final questions after some of our prepared ones from you all. So please keep that chat thread going. And I think we have a gift for the first really great question of each session. So if that's a motivating factor, go ahead and get the questions in there. And then the final thing is that we've got breakouts this afternoon. If you want to learn more, please join the product management, product people breakout. The panelists and myself will all be there, and we can't wait to interact with you more. All right, without further ado, I'd like to ask each of the panelists to help us define the role of product management in your terms. What is the day in the life of a product manager? What are basic expectations for the role? So I'm going to kick it off with Mary, if you could kind of get us started here.
Sure. So for me, what drew me into product management is that I really find that it's an amalgamation of all of these different components of the business as well as technology. So it's a combination of making sure that not only do you have a strong digital strategy, because I work in the area of digital product management as opposed to tangible products. And it's really a combination of marketing and legal and compliance and technology and business strategy and finance and all of those things that come together that are really pivotal from an alignment perspective to make sure that we're delivering business value through a technology project.
Awesome. Megan, can we get your thoughts on what is the day in the life of a product manager?
Sure, absolutely. So I think Mary is spot on in that one of the things that drew me to product management is that it is very much a generalist role in an organization. And so the day in the life of the product manager can look very different depending on what projects are in flight in your organization. I think one of the key functions that product is responsible for is really understanding the constraints across the business and being that cross-functional voice. So understanding marketing and sales and finance and engineering and all of the concerns coming into a project and tying that all back to business value. So a typical day in the life is really a lot of meetings and conversations with your stakeholder groups to understand their perspectives and point of view and what their goals are. And then really trying to carve out some thinking time to kind of take all of those inputs, write them up and think about how to solve the problem with all the constraints that you have. And then really it's collaborating with design and engineering on a hourly basis with regards to kind of, here's the problem we're facing, here are some ideas on how to solve it, what of these ideas are viable and feasible, and then how do you tie that all back to the user at the end of the day and make sure that you're creating value in the market. So it's talking to customers, it's talking to stakeholders, and it's talking to your peers in engineering and design to ensure that you're building something that really delivers market value.
I imagine all three of you are in Zoom or Teams or what have you meetings all day long.
Yes, we spend a lot of time on the phone these days. It used to be a lot of time in meeting rooms, and now it's a lot of time on the phone.
Awesome. Lauren, kind of same question, but if we could tack on to that, what are the basic expectations when you have people coming into role? What do you expect of them when they're a product manager?
Yeah, so when I think about product management and the expectations, a product manager is someone who truly owns their product inside and out, end to end. They are so deep in their product and so invested in the success of their product that it almost becomes an obsession of sorts. So when you think about some of the basic expectations, I think about someone who's naturally curious, someone who is a problem solver, who thinks really analytically, someone who can push on assumptions and identify problem areas, validate those problem areas, leveraging data, leveraging feedback from customers, creating business cases. Someone who can then, as they move on from forming that strategy, move into delivery in a really seamless way. And like Megan mentioned and Mary mentioned, working really closely with engineers and with design and with legal and compliance and all of these different groups, and really being this catalyst, leveraging out to all of these different groups to promote the success of your product.
I think that was a great segue. You've started giving us some of the characteristics or qualities of product managers. So curious, obsessed with the customer. They have to be, all of you have mentioned this, kind of strategic minding and collaborative. What are other must-haves when you're thinking about hiring product managers? And maybe what's a can't have? What would be a red flag for someone coming into this role? So I'll ask Megan, and then we'll tee up Mary, if that's all right.
Sure. So one quality that wasn't mentioned that I think is really critical is being super deliberative about the decisions that you're making. And by deliberative, I mean, you have to think as the product manager, like 4 or 5 steps ahead of everyone else around you. And that is really assessing the risks that the business might face by the decisions you're making and determining what is the right path forward, both for the business, but more importantly for the customer, like what is going to ultimately create value in the marketplace. I think one quality that I worry about in product managers is someone who is really truly a specialist. So there are some product management roles where that can be really beneficial. If you're a technical product manager and you're really deep into architecture or something like that from an engineering perspective. But for the most part, you want somebody who is not really a specialist, but is much more interested in that curious aspect, really trying to understand the business cross-functionally. And then it's really all about collaboration.
Mary, what do you look for in a good versus great product manager? And then what would be a red flag?
So I have to build upon what the others said with the curiosity. Every time someone has invited me to coffee to talk about what makes a good product manager, I can't stress enough, you have to be naturally curious and you have to be obsessive about the customer experience in order to be a good PM. And the other thing that I look for is that a product manager needs to be able to identify the right problem to solve at the right point in time. Because let's be frank, there's no shortage of problems or constraints that have to be addressed. But from my perspective, it's incredibly important to be able to prioritize what all of those constraints and what those problem statements might be, and then know when to tackle them at what point in time in order to deliver the right amount of value for the right consumer at the right point in time. So somebody that struggles with that concept of prioritization and being able to distill those constraints down into feasible chunks, that would be a red flag for me.
Awesome. Lauren, can I come back over to you? So we had the opportunity to meet as a group ahead of this. And one thing I'm curious about that you mentioned at your organization is kind of the distinction between product management and product ownership. Could you tell us a little bit about that and how it works in your org?
Yeah, so at Capital One, we are a larger organization. And so when we think about PMs and POs, there is a difference between the two. A product owner is generally focused on a single product. They develop the strategy for their product. They deliver, they ship, they work directly with tech and design and all of our other partners across the company to drive solutions and to drive iterative improvements to their product. When we think about a product manager, this is generally the PO's manager. It is someone who really develops the core strategy and the vision, and generally for a set of products across the team. This is someone who removes blockers and obstacles, who works with leadership across the other areas of the organization, be it other product leaders or tech leaders or risk leaders, to ensure that everyone is aligned across the board on the strategic direction of the team. And acts as an escalation point. So someone, when things are not going right, they can step in and provide some help and support to the POs.
I'd love to just hear, we mentioned there's no one right answer or way to structure a product org. Megan and Mary, how have you seen these dynamics play out, all of the places you have experience?
Very similar. I think the size of the organization is really telling as to the structure of the product team. So at a large company like Capital One, there is stratification in that. I recently did a contract with Etsy, and it was a little flatter. So it's, you know, a 5,000 person team instead of a 40,000 person team. So the product manager role is very much the one leading an agile team at that size of an organization. And then there's a group PM role, which generally is kind of managing PMs and bringing together a broader initiative and multiple product lines underneath a broader initiative. So it really, I think product management versus product ownership depends on the size of the company. And if you are more interested in kind of that pure agile delivery, working with engineers every day, shipping code, QA, all of that, product ownership is in a larger organization is probably where you should look. Whereas in a smaller team, product management and product ownership are generally the same function.
I think that's helpful. Mary, could you give us your perspective? And you've worked at a really large organization, a couple of them, and then now with a smaller group.
Sure. So back when I was with E-Trade Financial, we all had the same title and we were just product managers. But I would have to say that there was somewhat of a hierarchy within that, and that the product owner role was not named per se, but it definitely was more of a junior resource that was involved with working with technology on a daily basis, removing some impediments for the engineering teams, and writing those ever so valuable acceptance criteria for user stories that engineering acts upon. Whereas the product manager is usually typically somebody that organizes and manages a team of POs or junior PMs. So the organizations that I've worked with, similar to what Lauren and Megan mentioned, it's really based on the size and the scale of the organization. And but I've also worked in smaller companies where the PO or the PM role is really analogous, and there is no real difference between the two, because you have, in a smaller organization, you have to wear that visionary strategic hat on any given day. But on the same day, you might end up going into the weeds and needing to write some type of SQL query to figure out what your data, your breakpoints are for a particular business decision. So it really varies on the size of the organization.
Awesome. Since we're in a day all about driving your career and your network and being able to drive your skills, I'd like to ask this question of all three of you and then go to some of the great questions we're getting in the chat. So this is my last one. And you've all been able to make a jump and have a successful career in product management, and now are your product management leaders in your organizations. What's it like to make that jump from kind of being with the team and in the product manager role to being leaders of product managers? And Mary, can I start with you? And we'll just go in the same order, Mary, Megan, and then Lauren.
Sure. So for me to make that move, it was really about gaining the trust and the deep business understanding of what my business stakeholders needed to achieve, as opposed to being in the day-to-day execution role of a PO or a junior PM. And then also acquiring those people management skills, because in my opinion, you can teach someone to be a good business analyst or product owner as long as they're naturally curious and they have that spark of enthusiasm within their DNA. But it's harder to take someone who is very rigid and infuse that kind of characteristic into their personality or their DNA. The other thing that I would mention, sorry, what was the second half of the question?
What's it like to make the jump from?
Oh, what's it like to make the jump? So really understanding the business well enough to advocate for that business stakeholder on any given day at any moment in time in order to lead the team appropriately.
Awesome. I wrote down trust for sure. Megan.
Fairly similar answer to Mary. I think I took a little bit of an untraditional path into product leadership, as in I kind of grew up in the product marketing side of the organization, and was really responsible for our overarching go-to-market strategy and customer segmentation and value propositions. And so while I was working directly with a product team, while I was a product marketing manager, I kind of learned the product management function kind of ancillary. So I actually never, until in my career, never was that pure product owner, product manager role. But I have worked in companies that are very small and are startups. And so you play the role of both the strategist and the person writing the acceptance criteria and QAing the code and the SQL queries and all of those things. And so I would say for me, it's been a winding path. And the most important thing is what Mary already mentioned, is really understanding the business objectives, the user, and being able to advocate for the user, understanding the constraints of the business and the goals of the business, and really being viewed as kind of an expert in how your company makes money or saves money, and how your users are impacted by the decisions that the business is making, are really critical. And then I think it's also just kind of showcasing your management skills. And in product, it's actually really easy to do that, because while you are not a line manager for people, typically, you very much are responsible for cross-functional management of a team. And so it's pretty easy for you to showcase your management and organization skills and your communication skills, which are all kind of critical. So that one's an easy one to kind of jump from kind of working with managing a team to managing people.
Lauren, could you share some of your journey with us?
Yeah, so for me, it was a pretty big change. Going from being the doer and being super, super hands-on with a product, with the teams, to moving away from that and then working with your team to empower them to do, and doing that through sharing your past successes and things that have worked well for you, and past failures, and sharing those things really equally too. And really stepping out of the limelight in a way, and putting that spotlight onto your folks, onto your team, onto the people that you're investing in. And I think that's one of the best parts for me, is being able to invest in people, more than just primarily investing in the work itself. So it's definitely been rewarding.
Awesome. All right, we're going to jump to Q&A. We've got a very healthy Q&A going. Since these are kind of across the board, different focus areas, I'm just going to try and keep an eye on my cameras. Feel free to kind of chime in or give me some cue that you're really interested in this particular question, and we'll do our best not to talk over each other. So the first one came in from Shelly. Shelly, thank you so much for your question. What advice do you all have for helping stakeholders understand the shift in focus from projects to products?
I can take this one. I think it also depends on the type of company and the type of products you're working on. I think the concept that resonates with me the most is that products are durable. And so a product is something that is going to last forever. It is something you're building that is delivering value for the customer indefinitely. A project is typically something that is time-based that you're working on. It may be an initiative to really improve a certain aspect of your product, but the product is the durable entity and the project is a time-based kind of initiative that you're working against. And then helping, I think, critical for stakeholder management in that is articulating that products are durable and that your teams need to become expert in the durable product and the customer problems behind the durable product, whereas projects can ebb and flow, and doing too much, in my opinion, moving around of resources that are project-based can be kind of detrimental to really understanding your user.
Other thoughts there? We have a healthy backlog of questions too, so I can also ask the next one. Let's do that. So what specific things does a PO and PM do with delivery or go live and that piece of the equation?
I can take that one. So in my experience, the product owner, the product manager role is not just responsible for the build and the completion of the product or the application, but I feel that we're also responsible for bringing the rest of the organization along to help for a successful launch of the product. And the coordination from what I call an operational readiness perspective. So you need to make sure that customer service is ready to go and that training is ready to go, and all of those. Any kind of any individual within the organization that could potentially have a touch point with a customer or a user of the product needs to be ready and understand it. Otherwise, you have a potential for risk from a user adoption perspective, or the success of the application could be potentially undermined. So from my perspective, the product person is responsible for, they talk about the entire life cycle of the product, but with the lifespan of the application and how long it's going to stay alive and how durable it is, as Megan had mentioned. But I really feel that it's the product manager's responsibility to ensure that the organization is ready from an operational perspective to support the product as well.
So important. Lauren, Megan, other ideas for the PM role in that go live process?
Yeah, it's really an orchestration of all of those things that Mary mentioned. And each different player has to be playing their part at the right time to make it all come together. So I think it's just really important to be very intentional about stakeholder management and communication and anticipating what the impacts and what the ripple effects that your product can have on the rest of the organization, and planning for those ahead of that go live, and having backup plans too, in case things don't quite go as planned, as they do.
That was my next question. So I'll keep going here. We're not going to get to all of these questions, but I'll do another plug for the breakout session. And then we have a couple of questions on resources, courses, certifications that you all would recommend. Luckily, we knew that one was coming, and RVA Tech has given us the ability to post some materials after the webinar. So I'm going to table that one, but we will be providing kind of this group's perspective on things you could do if you're interested in a career path. All right, back to the questions, and thank you to Sharon for that last one. Sanita asked, what are some of the challenges that PMs most often face, and how do you overcome them? I guess, what's the hardest part about being a PM? What's the biggest challenge?
I can jump in on that one. The hardest part is making everyone happy. I think one of the things that Mary mentioned with regards to like prioritization in what problems do you solve first and why? Typically somebody's problem is falling down to the bottom of the list for a good reason. And I think you have to say no, and you have to deliver bad news sometimes. And I think, to me, that's the hardest part of the job. I think trust and building really good relationships with your stakeholders so that when you deliver a no, they believe your reasoning and they fully understand why, and you have data and science to back it up is really critical. But for me, the hardest part is that you only have one thing you can work on at a time generally, or you have to make prioritization decisions, and somebody's most important problem kind of falls to the bottom of the list.
That's a great
And
answer.
I would add on to that to say communication is also a challenge, because you are that central point, and because so many people are looking to you for information, or because they're trying to get something prioritized, or because your product is going to impact another team operationally, whatever it is, there's a ton of communication overhead. So figuring out how to do that in a really efficient way that gets everybody what they need without being too taxing on your time and energy.
All right, I think we have time for one more. So I'm going to combine some themes I see in questions. So Kiko and Rob, thank you both for your question, as well as Robin. How do you, or what are your tips for making sure as a product manager or product owner, you're staying relevant in the organization? And there could be a pandemic spin on this, and just making sure that you're staying relevant and adding value, but also how do you convince the organization that you are adding value? And a couple of questions asked about that, particularly for a small organization. So I combined about 3 there. Sorry if it's a lot to unpack.
Mommy.
I can jump in. I think in places where I have worked, large, medium, and small, product inherently has to be the most relevant stakeholder in the room, because it is critical for them to understand market impacts to their customers, market impacts to their business, and how the world is changing around them. And if they are not kind of at the forefront of understanding that, they're not really doing their job. And so, I have never worked in an organization where product is trying to remain relevant. There are some organizations that are very sales driven, and maybe sales has a little bit of a louder voice than product, but it should be equal at the end of the day. You both should be talking to customers so often that you understand the problems intrinsically, and you maybe would approach the solutions to those problems slightly differently, but ultimately you come together at really understanding the market and understanding the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, and to add to that, Megan, when we think about product and we think about leaning into the human and the human need, we think about leaning into technology, we think about leaning into business. In a time like we're in right now, where we've got a pandemic, we've got all sorts of things happening outside of our companies and in our environment, looking at the business side of what we do and leaning into where can we drive efficiencies? Where can we do things smarter? Like, what's the low-hanging fruit? When I think about like that question as it's relevant here and now, that's where me and my team are currently leaning in, to say how can we do more with less right now, and how can we get really smart about that? So I think that's a great way to really drive impact, and the right kind of impact in our current environment as product managers.
All right, we are a minute over time, but there is a ton of chat and activity going on. Like I said, these panelists have volunteered to join us for the breakout, and their contact information, I put their LinkedIns in the chat. Please stay connected. This is all about growing your network, getting put in touch with folks who you have shared interest and passion. So thank you to all 3 of you, Lauren, Megan, Mary, for your insights today. Really, really helpful. And we'll give everyone a few minutes of a break before our next session.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.